morning, good morning, good morning, LinkedIn Live. We're live. Good morning, Saj. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
I feel as though we've almost already had like a mini a mini
Yeah,
conversation before we got onto here.
we have.
Which is,
I think when I reposted the invite, I wrote on there that we just recently met. We've had one
yeah,
conversation, but I remember coming off the call, and then we could have just talked on forever.
yeah,
And it's,
yeah,
oh my God, we've just literally had this virtual coffee.
yeah,
Never have met, and then you kindly
yeah,
reached out and said, "I'd love for you to be part of this." And I
yeah.
was like, "Oh my gosh," and then I thought, "Oh well, it's just talking to Cheryl."
It's just talking. It's just-
So why not? Why not? It's a little bit early for me today because we're on half term. So
yeah,
like mothers with
yeah. And
moms. So
yeah, a lot of women are off this week, aren't they? We were
yeah,
just saying, weren't we? It's a little bit quieter in a good way, I think. Because I was saying to somebody yesterday, I think that I've noticed with holidays and things like that, when the schools are off, that generally it's a lot quieter. And I hope that's because people are genuinely switching off. Like I really do hope that, because I think we need a bit of that at the moment.
absolutely. And it's and I think it's a nice time to self-regulate as well. So
Yeah,
just to take your foot off the gas. And just reflect and just catch up with yourself. But
yeah,
as you
absolutely.
and I both know, a woman's work's never done. So I'm sure
Yeah,
we're very good at
that's
filling those
yeah,
space something entirely different, but it still keeps
yeah.
us happy. Yeah.
That will probably be the first of a few kind of like cliches and quotes and phrases that you'll hear this morning, I'm sure. But thank you for those of you that are joining. If you're listening live on your Friday morning while either if you're off, and you're just kind of pottering about the house, or you're getting ready to start the day, but maybe you're working from home. Thank you for joining. If you are listening live, feel free to say good morning in the chat, or if you're listening on the replay, thank you for taking a bit of time out of your day. So I feel as though I need to try to introduce Saj Zafar, although I'm not sure it's possible. For those that don't know Saj Zafar, please go and check out the LinkedIn bio, because absolutely fascinating in terms of your start in life, which I think I'm going to be right in saying that your start in life was psychology, but then pretty much moving into what I guess I call, and Sal Nassim talks about this on LinkedIn, a life of public service. So working,
Yeah.
in the civil service, in prisons. So I think
Mm.
I read in your bio that your first appointment was at Wormwood Scrubs. So
Yes.
not for the faint of heart. And you've worked on some quite I guess sort of landmark pieces of work, so things around like Windrush, for example, which I found quite interesting. But now you are the founder of Leadership Academy, so building an academy for women looking for personal and professional growth, offering tailored coaching and mentoring to women, and partnering with organizations. So Saj, thank you so much for taking a bit
No,
of time out for this conversation.
no, thank you. Thank you, Cheryl, for like I said, I feel like we're a kindred spirit. So
Yeah,
now, and the fact that we had such a lovely conversation when we first met a couple of
yeah.
weeks ago, and to come back, I just feel like it's a follow-up conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're gonna, I'm sure we're gonna get into all sorts of things. We're probably gonna be meandering around a little bit, but obviously, we're gonna talk about women's leadership. So let's start from the beginning in terms of, because your experience is vast and incredible. So how did you get into the area that you're in now? So in terms of women's leadership, and why? What was the journey through your career that's kind of ended up here?
Okay, so I started. I graduated in forensic psychology, and I
Mhm.
just knew immediately that I would end up in two spaces. Either I would end up with the police or the prisons.
Right.
And I ended up in prisons.
Yeah.
So this was the late 90s, and I was, looking back now, reflecting on my career, I think some things have just happened, and it's about
Mm.
being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So late 90s, there was a huge number of sexual offences being committed by young people, 15 to sort of 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
And as a knee-jerk reaction, by the government. I think one of the things they were considering is even if we were to lock up these young people who have committed such serious offences,
Yeah.
well, I think the Daily Mail headline was like, "Are we breeding monsters?" What would happen to these young people when they came out and released?
Right.
So we didn't have anything as such in this country, and our colleagues over in North America were well ahead of us with their research, their treatment programs. So I was part of that initial setting up of therapeutic units for young sex offenders. So, and as a typical 20 plus something, given the way I was raised and my backstory of being the daughter of first migrant, illiterate parents, and really having that sort of family and cultural conflict. So for me, just having a job was just a relief. So typically, I just kept my head down. I loved what I was doing. I felt there was this big, space that I was in, which really was everything that I wanted and more.
Yeah.
And unbeknown to me, I came to the attention of senior leadership. And sort of 5 years on, by then I'd learned my little reward and recognition, as the employee of the year, a good practice year. So it wasn't surprising that I got pulled in, and the conversations was really about what's next. And for me, I'm going to be very honest. I didn't have any clue about what was going to happen next. I was just enjoying what I was doing, and it was the governor at the time, and I guess he saw some potential in me that I didn't even know I had. And he sort of said, "Why don't you go and do the leadership program and see what comes of it?" And so fast forward 6 months later, I'm standing at the gates of Wormwood Scrubs as a new prison service governor, and and I was the first. I was the first youngest Asian Muslim woman. So, and then of course there's a little bit of a celebration around that, and I think this really captures the essence of the beginnings of my leadership when I was asked in an interview, what are the challenges of being a prison service governor? And I said, young, Asian and female. Because everything that I had been taught at the Prison Service College in terms of security, operations, managing people, that was absolutely fine. But nothing had prepared for the fact that I would be working part of an institution which was predominantly all white men in uniform. And so that was quite novel for them. It was a brand new space for them. More importantly, it was a very unique space for me. And those early challenges of finding myself and trying, and I think you will agree, when you go into a new post, the first thing you want to be liked and accepted and respected. That's what it's not about doing the job, it's about how will I fit in. And so for me, it was all about how can I fit in. And this is so relevant to the programs that I'm doing now, in the sense that I found myself editing myself. And looking back, it was important, it happened. But now I think, 20 years later, we're in a different space. I'd like to think we're more inclusive, we're more open. Whereas back then, I think, sexism, racism was very crude. It was very crass. It was more overt rather than covert. So for me, in order to survive and thrive in that environment, I found myself editing myself, and to the extreme, I would even say to defeminize myself, so that I didn't want anybody to look at me and say she's a woman, she's a female. And so I really tuned into my alpha woman status. I'm probably the other end of the spectrum. So, when I came out of prisons, one of the other challenges then I had was, as somebody said, you're not very soft. Your soft skills are not very autocratic. You're very directive. But these of the things that I developed and adopted, because for me, when I was growing up, when you thought about leadership, it was white, male, and privileged. And I think to some, I can go as far as saying it still is, but back then that's what you saw. So for me, to be accepted as a leader, that is what I had to emulate.
Right.
So fast forward, despite those challenges, early challenges, I ended up, like I said, just progressing. And one thing that I think, as an Asian woman, having the backstory, going through the prison system as a governor, coming out, one thing I did have in abundance, and that was resilience. So I was too familiar. Every time there was a knockback or a setback, my thing is to come back. Always to come back.
Yeah.
And so when I got into central government, I found myself towards the latter part of my years. I found myself as probably the only woman in those spaces, and more importantly, the only female of color in those spaces. And so in 2019, I had a health scare, and like most people, I sat down, had a bit of a reevaluation of my life and what did I want. And one of the things that I really thought about was that I thoroughly enjoyed my leadership journey. I've been very blessed to take on some, like you've mentioned, Grenfell, Windrise, some really high-profile posts. But ultimately, the thing that had been consistent, the thread that ran through my leadership, was that the fact that I'm a certified coach, and I would always enjoy paving the way for the younger women coming up behind me. So I think for me, it was just obvious. It was the obvious choice. So when I thought designing, I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought to myself, I want to make sure that I'm able to bottle my experience, but also, try to think about why is it that some women actually smash those ceilings and they get through, and why is the huge number, the bulk, they end up and they don't. And for me, it was a case of when I looked at data around 2009 when I first started, I thought if you slice the organization, what you're still seeing is that white male top table. And don't get me wrong, in the last 7 years, we've seen white women, coming through, pushing through and taking their seats at those tables. The bit that I really was leaning into was, where were the Black and Asian women? And repeatedly, from the very little data that was out there, it was screaming that, we are disproportionately right at the bottom of the pit. And our ceilings are much, much lower. And I think it's McKinsey's report, Women in the Workplace, that identified that we have the double whammy of not only race but gender. And they said not only do we have the glass ceiling, but we also have the broken rung. So in terms of when men and women start off their careers, men obviously fare better and they progress. Women fare better than Black and Asian women or women of color, but we end up with a broken rung. So we have that disadvantage even at that level. So progression after that is so difficult. So for me, that was the reason why I decided, if I need to commit myself to something that I want to do, which is my cause and resonates with me, having being where I've been, I thought this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create Leadership Academy, which is really about getting organizations to really develop their female talent through succession planning and to help to progress more women, especially women into leadership.
And I mean, there's so much. There isn't really long enough to talk about everything, even that you've covered there. There was so much. I was thinking, shall I interrupt now? Shall I go now? Because there's so much in there. No. I just wanted to hear the experience and morning.
Oh my gosh, this is
and there's Sophia has commented, good morning, Sophia. Sophia Nichols there. Self-edit. Wow. Sometimes our environment creates traits that are not natural, but almost essential. Because, yeah, when you were talking about, the behaviors and having to, as my daughter would say, step into your masculine energy to kind of to survive and thrive in that and in that environment. And Sophia's always also added, I love what Madeleine McQueen says about women in leadership, leading with elegance. So there is that thing about, and we may or may not get into that, almost this thing around what feels natural to you in terms of a style, whether that style is what has, I guess, been considered as more traditionally feminine or more traditionally masculine. And I use traditionally because there's but we are socialized in certain ways that are kind of tend to fall within kind of the two, albeit people have kind of elements of both. But yeah, what you said about having to filter out, really sort of resonate. I think for a lot of people, that um enter into the workplace, this filters out. Good morning, Stuart. How are you doing? Stuart Cumberbatch there from Deloitte has joined. Great summary. Yeah, I mean, in terms of in terms of your experience and how you described it, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about that you mentioned. You talked about keeping your head down, and that you came to the attention of somebody, as part of your journey quite early on in the career. How common would you say that is? Is that relatively common, or what do you think? What do you think it was that led to that individual kind of spotting you and deciding to almost like sort of sponsor you in that role?
I think there was only one me.
Right.
And back then it was very unique, and everything I did, I was under scrutiny. I mean, I was under scrutiny. I was under the spotlight, and that can work for you, and it can work against you, right? And I was always conscious that I was in this glass case, so everything I did was being watched, and so for me, that's why the self-editing was so important. Even just my appearance. This, the other day, just as a side, somebody said, "Stash, every time I see you in an interview or in the public space, you always wear the black. You wear black." And I said, rest in peace, Steve Jobs. But nobody asked him why he was always dressed in white. But for me, there was a reason, and the reason was, and I have to share this, and it really ties in what we're talking about, because when I first landed in prisons, I was 23 year old, and typically it was my first real job. I rushed to Topshop and updated my wardrobe, and I'll never forget, I got this lovely little two-piece suit with a blouse, because in my head that's what a professional woman looked like. So I got a little jacket, a skirt, with tights and shoes, and I turned up on my first day, and the governing governor, rest in peace, he looked me up and down and made it very clear that I was young, I was attractive, and I was very close to the age of the prisoners. And he said, these women, prisoners can, what was the word he used? They can smell a woman before they see a woman. And it's up to you how you conduct yourself and create the boundaries. I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified. It's my first induction and my first job. And it's the last conversation that you expect to hear. I'm confident you wouldn't be hearing those conversations now. And I remember, straight afterwards going into the loo and just breaking down blubbering. And he was the secretary that came in, and she consoled me and in a roundabout way tried to explain what he was saying. And she was saying, you need to be mindful of who you are as a female in this environment. And so I did, and I went back. Thank God I had the receipt. I bought suits that were trouser suits. I got rid of anything that was feminine or frilly or revealed. So I was always covered, and I took my lenses out. I stuck my glasses on. I put my hair in, this has become my signature, and it's the most comfortable look that I wear for my professional space. And this is how it came about.
Wow, that's just, do you know what? I mean, this honestly, you explaining that story, that I resonate with that a lot. But I mean, I guess what we have to bear in mind, for anybody that didn't hear your intro, you were working in prisons, and actually your
Yes.
area of
Yeah.
expertise was with sexual offenders as well. So
Yes.
just for the
Yeah.
context and the
Yes.
background, not that therefore
Yes.
necessary, but we have to understand that context. But similar to you, when I joined, and I've spotted Stuart's question, what can us men do to support? When I joined EY, this is how old I am, right? Back in the day, I remember um, women pretty much all, professional services, we pretty much always wore, skirts, suits. And I remember the day when we were told that it was okay for women to wear trousers. Like, that's
Yes.
how old I am, right?
Yes.
I'm not that
Yes.
old. This is 90s. This is
Yes.
90s,
Of course.
EY professional services. And I also remember, because I used to dress quite brightly, a bit like, it's because as you started talking about, now wearing black, I literally almost wear black every day. But I used to dress quite brightly. And
Yeah.
even sometimes outside of work, I will often dress in quite bright colors. But yeah, from a work perspective, it's usually black,
Yeah.
black, black. In fact, one year I started wearing gray, and somebody said to me, "You do realize gray is not a color, right? It's just a shade of black." But so one of the
Yeah.
things that Stuart said, and we're probably going to get onto this anyway, but we might as well pick it up here. Stuart is a partner at Deloitte. So just for context for you, Saj, Stuart said, what can us men do to support? And Deirdre, good morning, Deirdre. Deirdre Lebassier, just like the most beautiful sounding name, says, there's only one me. We must embrace that truth. And we'll probably come back to that, I think, Saj, that importance of recognizing your uniqueness and in the work that you do with women. Let's go on to the question about men. What can men do to support in this space?
The thing is, it's men and women. And I'm not playing Stuart's question down. And I think, and I want to answer this question in a way that, just to give it a little bit of context, that I think nowadays we're in a good space. Like, I'd like to think we're more inclusive, we're open-minded, and we're more respectful of each other's differences, and it's got to be said. Yeah. However, what happens is, what people not too often talk about and shy away from, is that all of us hold some level of bias. You, I, everybody holds a level of bias. And it's about being open-minded to that what is my bias? Okay, what are the things that I hold, and where does that actually stem from? And once you know that, then you can actually do something about it. So when Stuart or anybody asks me about how can we support, it's about understanding that your experience as a Black man is going to be very different to my experience as an Asian female. Right? There are going to be some similarities, but there's still going to be differences, and it's about the the intersectionality of that. And what we don't do is, we don't broad brush everybody, or all Black people, or all Asian people, or all we don't, but sadly that's what we do, because the stereotyping that we hold in our head, that helps us to make sense, and that comes to the forefront. So for me, it's about making sure, I mean, right now everybody's talking about psychological safe spaces. Truly, to understand what a psychological safe space is where I can be my true authentic self without the fear of judgment. That is what I need. And in order to create that for me, is for me to understand that, how comfortable are you having that conversation? And how comfortable are you to not only have that conversation, but to actually hear me out, right? Because sometimes we're too afraid that if I ask this question, then it can take me to a space that I don't feel comfortable, or I don't even know what to do with. And this is the conversation I tend to have with white men. They say, Saj, I'm thinking that I want to do something, but then I don't know what to do. I don't know what is the right thing to do. And I always sort of say that not everybody, but I've always come from the space of educating and advocating. And for me, that if I know that somebody is genuinely interested in me, genuinely wants to hear what my experiences are, then I'm prepared to have a clumsy conversation. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm prepared to throw you a lifeline. I'm prepared to even tell you exactly where I am and what it is I need. But we need to have that space. We need to have that conversation. We need to be able to have that dialogue. But unless you engage in those conversations, you and I, we can coexist in that professional capacity. You or I will never ever understand what it means to be you and I.
It's just as I was like listening to your answer, and you're right in terms of, this is around what, men and women can do to support each other, because actually we all hold quite sort of like, gender stereotypical ways of how we interact with each other. One of the things that I was going to say about the kind of the what can men do to support, and as you were talking there about your experiences as a South Asian female, and then comparing, say, to Stuart as a Black man. There's a book, one of the books that I read. Everybody knows I'm a massive book nerd, right? So one of the books that really opened my eyes more to the experiences of Asian women, in particular East Asian and South Asian women, was the book The Good Immigrant. Because I'd never before really, I don't know whether you've read that book, but it's a collection of essays. If anybody hasn't read it, I'd really encourage you to read it. I sometimes recommend it to leadership teams once they're far along enough the journey, but it's a collection of essays by writers who are either first or second gen immigrants to the UK. So it's a brilliant book. And it talks, for me, that's where I first started to understand, certainly in terms of the stereotypes around women, how it was different between, say, for example, South Asian, East Asian, Black women. It's we're not a monolith, right? And the differences, and in particular, the fetishization of particularly East Asian women, but also, around South Asian women as well. There's some statistics around that, so when you were telling that story about, going into the workplace and maybe being dressed, in a skirt suit, and I could, there's a visual that we have, right? I can understand how that plays out, and not to kind of like justify it, but thinking of the context that I read about in that book, it kind of makes sense. And there is something about, you talked about almost like you having to then behave in a way that kind of almost like contradicted that stereotype, right? Being quite sort of strong and directive, because the stereotype also was probably quite submissive, submissive Asian female, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm working with the women, one of the things that we have the 4 pillars, and the first pillar is all around self-introspection. So many of us, we've not had probably the confidence or the time or the space to unpack some of that stuff. And I think in order for you to, the thing that what I promote is, in order to lead others, you need to be able to lead you. And in order to lead you, you need to have a really good self-awareness about who you are, what your values are, and more importantly, when those values are breached, what do you actually do, when you enter those spaces of conflict. And too often women will sort of say, there are parts of me that I've lost because I am trying to be this person in the workspace. And so, and how do we encourage authenticity? And the one of the questions I think, I know we don't have time, so I'd love to explore, perhaps on a separate one, is, are we really in that space? Are we really ready for people to be their true authentic selves? And the answer from my own experience and from the women that I work, the answer is no. And the reason why I get told it's no is because, it's easy to say, yes, you can be your true authentic self. But however, when I do show up in my true authentic self, then you find you struggle to handle that.
I often ask the question of, I always say there's 2 questions. Can I come to work and be my authentic self? Can I come to work, be my authentic self, and still get promoted, right? Because those are 2 completely different things.
And women say it's career suicide. It's
absolutely.
Suicide if I really brought my true authentic self to work and, spoke my mind and really, played out or lived out my
Yeah.
true values, it would be career suicide,
Yeah.
because it goes against everything of the stereotype that they hold of me, what their
Yeah.
expectations are of me. And so I know, I have to be, what do we call it? A way of being. There's a
Yeah.
way of being, there's an etiquette
Absolutely.
of being that allows me to go through the system or the
Yeah.
process without all the
Yeah.
unnecessary
Yeah.
additional, stuff.
Yeah. And a lot of that is unwritten, and kind of I want to almost like go back to, because Sophia's got it in her question as well, in terms of in fact Sophia's kind of potentially putting an answer around, the how can men better support, also how can women support without feeling threatened by other women. Oh my gosh, that's the topic, Sophia,
Oh, that
because
is a
women seem to
different
find
topic.
it hard to bring other women along their leadership journey. I just wanted to circle back onto the thing about men. So the one thing I feel that it's nice to kind of shout out as part of this conversation, there are some great men on LinkedIn doing some amazing work in this space. So
Yes.
for example, Elliot Ray talking about men in parenting spaces. So seeing men in that different role. So the thing I would say to Stuart and to all leaders, actually, so not just men, but all leaders who are parents, right?
Yes.
Men, women, any gender, etc. But feeling confident to embrace that kind of nurturing parent, caring role that is often seen as the default for women. I think when leaders demonstrate more of that, that makes it then okay for women to be like, I have got to leave early to pick the kids up or whatever, and some of this is, we're kind of stereotyping, a little bit, but there is something about when leaders flex into their feminine energy, if we call it that, if we were just being really sort of like binary about it, but leaders embracing that side of them, whether they are, male or female or any gender, I think then makes it easier then for women to show up at work
Yeah.
and embrace all of those sides, bring their kind of ultra feminine side, their mother side, their wife, their whatever it be,
Yeah.
by men leaning into that. So I thought that was just worth a quick
Can
mention.
I quickly come in and interject?
Sure.
I've got this wonderful story, and I've openly said too many and too often, and it's what I live by. It's my own experience, that some of my greatest allies are white men. Right, I've said that, and I stick by that. And the thing about being a parent, and I think we've all been there, that when you look at the clock, we as mothers, as working mothers, we consistently look at the clock. And I used to have 2 little babies in daycare, so I was the first mother to drop them off and the last mother to pick them up because of my working hours. And I was always conscious that if I had to leave at a certain time, that everybody's eyes would be on me, and then there would be that smile, that nod, that rolling of the, so I would try to leave or exit quietly, walking backwards with my staff, feeling immense guilt. And I remember I was sitting at a table. We were in a very important meeting, and then suddenly I realized what the time was, and we'd overly ran. And I literally grabbed my bag and my coat, and I made my apologies, and I said, "I'm so sorry. I have to go. I have to pick up the children, otherwise social services will have me." And before anybody could react, I'm not going to mention any names, but the minister was actually chairing the meeting. And I said, "Oh, thank God's sake, you reminded. I've also got to pick up the little one today." and it was lovely that he too got up. I got up. And everybody was like, oh, and it was like, and we both left, and he ran to his car, and I went to mine. And it was just so nice and thing that, that happened at the time that it did. It just made me feel, oh my God, it's just not me. It's okay, and these are the bits that I'm talking about editing, that, as parents, as people of color, and that in that, when you talk about being your true authentic self, can we actually be our true authentic self?
And this is where that bravery comes. Sometimes when we talk about the the inclusive leadership, one of the elements is courage. So having that courage to be that person in the meeting that says, I've got to go, I've got to pick the kids up, otherwise they're going to be standing on the street, right? And then it's interesting how, when you explain that story, you did it, and then it led to somebody else doing it as well, which That's
Yeah.
often what happens, right? And that's where the courage comes into it. So, back to Stuart's point, this conversation around what can men
Yeah.
and women do, and women in leadership. I think there is that thing of, as leaders, role modeling. It's okay to be a carer, it's okay to wear bright clothes, it's okay to, that thing about the authenticity. So Sophia saying here, but is our true authentic self so terrible? Do we need to revisit our true authentic self? Surely authenticity is our values. I'm struggling with that thought that we cannot be our true authentic self. Help me understand better. I think, what are your thoughts, Saj? What do you want to say about that
No,
particular comment there?
no, Sophia, don't be panicked by what I've said. What I'm talking about is there are still some spaces, and I use that word, some spaces, where although the policies and everything screams out that yes, we're all inclusive, and we embrace that inclusiveness, but we really haven't reached that point where we can actually sort of say we respect each other's authenticity, and there is an expectation that you behave and do as the dominant race or gender is in that workspace. So for me, what I'm talking about is there are still women that I work with that will sort of say, I have to edit myself. I have to keep hold of that, because if I do go into that space and express, like you said, if I wore my clothes and the way in the colors, or if I was just loud, I was it would bring the wrong kind of attention. Whereas I try to keep myself contained and considered and very much measured, because I just don't want to be looked at as being different.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to that innate desire of wanting to be accepted, respected, and liked.
Which is innate, as you say, absolutely is innate. I think there's something, I've got a theory, and I've sort of been peddling this theory for a little while now. I've got a theory that that one of the things that you need, especially as if you're trying to progress in an organization, that one of the things that you need, particularly if you are in the minority, so if you are the only whatever it be in the room, right? And you want almost like that permission. I mean, I say two different things depending on if you're leadership and if you're the individual. So to leadership, I say you have to recognize that for some people it is harder to just be their authentic selves, because they're coming into a space where they don't see anybody else like them. They see, as you were describing, earlier in the conversation, they see certain kind of stereotypical, kind of Western styles of leadership, which somebody like a sort of, say, Donald Trump really kind of emulates that very Western style of leadership, right? So I always say to leaders, you have to recognize that for some people in the organization, it is going to feel harder to just be yourself. And then to individuals, I sort of say, one of the skills I think it's very important, especially as you start to progress up the organization, is that skill of building relationships. Because I've got a theory that actually the better you can get at building relationships, which in itself is a leadership skill, right? That actually, I think, gives you more permission to be yourself.
Yes.
If that makes sense. This is just my theory, because actually, if you can still create that human connection with somebody else and be your weirdest, wackiest, most eccentric self, you will actually be almost like forgiven for quite a lot, if that makes sense, in terms of those differences. It's just a theory that I've got, that actually the key thing is, can you still make connection with other people as yourself, right? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. And I think we are the product of our experiences. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
So, and I can only go, as people of colour, from all the research and all the data and the women that I work with, is you are going to be wary. Trust is going to be a huge issue. You're not going to just parachute in. I don't hear women sort of saying, "Oh, I parachute in and I'm just my true authentic self." Leave me. You never get that. So we absolutely what you said, and I think you've nailed it, in the fact that we have to come into those spaces. Although we will be wary in the beginning, we'll be mindful. We'll try to figure out where our allyship is, and that's something we haven't talked about. Where are my allies? can I, how can I behave? How should I be behaving? And we do, and I do think that we bring out, elements of ourselves into the workspace. But what I don't think we do is, and I don't think white people have to think about this. They don't have to think about what it means to be white in a workspace. Okay, let's call that out. Okay, as a white person, you don't have to go into, you don't leave your house, you don't go onto the bus, you don't go into spaces and say, I wonder what it's like to be white. Can I be white today? We are consistently reminded. I don't go out of the house thinking, oh, I'm an Asian woman, but somebody somewhere will do something, right, that will trigger and remind me of who I am. And that is the difference. That's what we are dealing with. Absolutely, I agree with you that one of the biggest ways to break through and to really secure your spot, and that is about building that trust, building relationships, building your allies. And and one of the things I always encourage the women to look for mentors and sponsors. And then I always get this question: do they have to be Black? Do they have to be? Do they have to be? No, they can be anybody. Your allyship has to mean something to you. Okay. So these are the things I think nuances we have to discuss. That,
absolutely. Sophia's got here, the best course for women in leadership is emotional intelligence. I don't, we're totally agreed on that. I think to overcome the barriers, it will help to love people, connect with them, and learn about them. We might learn something about them and find where we can better connect. Absolutely. It is a critical skill. It absolutely is a critical skill, being able to connect with other people. Let's talk a little bit, because you touched on it there, this point around allyship, mentorship, sponsorship, and this links back again to Stuart's question around the what can leaders do, etc. Because there is this thing about the importance of allies, and a little bit like you in my career, my sponsors typically, because I'm older, my sponsors typically were white males, that then were a bit like yours, were spotting something and pulling you up through the organization. So let's talk about the importance of that and how leaders can help in that space when it comes to women in their organizations.
So important. And I think it works both ways. It's twofold. So for the women, when I say to them, before you go and get a mentor or a sponsor, be clear on your ask, right? And I've been, and I'm sure you have, Cheryl, and I'm sure colleagues who are online have been. So when somebody comes to me and says, Sandra, I want you to mentor me, the first thing I would want to ask them is, what do you want mentoring? What do you want mentoring for? Because it's not a chit chat. It's not about conversation. Let's meet every month. And there's a distinction between mentorship and sponsoring. So for the women, I always say to them, when you go, be clear, right? When you're selecting your mentor, why am I asking Cheryl to mentor me? What does Cheryl have that could encourage, enable me, empower me to take me from where I am to where I need to be? What is the skill set? What is the expertise or experience that I'm looking for? And also, how are we going to structure that time? Because let's clear, we're all time starved, right? So giving somebody a mentoring session of 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever it is, you want to be, you want to make sure that you give that impact and value in that conversation or in that interaction. So that's really, really important. Sometimes people get really, really confused about mentoring and sponsoring. Sponsors, leaders need to actually recognize that if you've got, let's say I'm director at director level, I'm a man, what is it that I can give to somebody to help to raise them, to bring them? And one of the things that I say about sponsorship is that I can actually give them a project, or I can give them my time, I can give them some insight, some practical stuff that will actually, that they wouldn't necessarily get doing the job that they do. And the other thing is, how do you advocate? And this is the other thing that I need to talk about, recruitment. Okay, we know that there is one type of recruitment, which is, all about the fair level playing field, about applications and CVs and interviews. But the one that we don't talk about is it's who you know. Okay. And as you progress up the ladder, it's got to be said that you're more likely to get recruited because of the person that you know. So, and you know, and this comes as a shock for, you know, some of the middle managers that I work with. When I say to them, if I'm recruiting you, I'm going to do my due diligence. I'm going to ask Cheryl that Sophia's just made an application. What's she like? I want to know all of that before she comes to talk to me. And decisions are based on that. And it's not necessarily just the CV or what we, you know, the conversation we have in that 30 minutes. And so again, as leaders, we need to be mindful, who are the people that have got potential? Who is it that I can invest in? But more importantly, who is it that I can advocate for? And you know, there's enough research. I mean, it's a different conversation altogether. That we tend to recruit, engage with people in our own mirror, right? And so, you know, if I'm going to think of somebody, you know, if I'm a white privileged man, I'm going to think of the Barrys and the Craigs and the Johns of this world, right? Oh, you know, I'm not going to think about Sandra or Cheryl of this. So again, being mindful and open-minded. And it's modeling, isn't it? Let's keep it real. It's modeling. Actually, you know, what Sophia was saying about your children, authentic self is about your values and being able to bring those values and being able to model that.
Yeah. And I loved what you said about the sponsorship thing in particular. You mentioned projects. So when I'm talking to individuals and they say, well, how do I get a sponsor? I'm always sort of saying things like, you know, if there is a piece of work, and I'm not advocating, you know, being completely overstretched, etc., but if there is a piece of work like a project or a strategic initiative that individual is, you know, kind of like sponsoring, you know, a senior leader, get on that, you know, because you want to get visible to those individuals so that those individuals do feel comfortable to advocate for you. Because what we're not asking is for charity, right? We're not asking for people to advocate for people that aren't very good at what they do, right? But by getting that visibility, you know, that individual gets visibility of the quality that you can deliver, they are more likely to advocate for you. And just so the point that you made there in terms of, you know, when these interesting pieces of work come up, don't just go to the usual suspects, you know, think of the women, the younger people, etc.
It's twofold, because if I'm putting work out there and if you don't volunteer, then I cannot be held responsible. Leaders will not take time out from their desk and go in search of people. So for the flip of the other side of that, what I teach the women is, whose radar are you on? Who knows about you, right? And what do people say about you when you're not in the room? Okay, and this is all about personal branding. You can't be expected, right, to go rise to the top if nobody's ever heard of you. So if I walk into EY and I sort of say, oh, you know, I've got a meeting with Cheryl Miller, and they're like, look at me blank. Who is she? Does she work here? That speaks volumes. However, if I walk into EY and said, I've got a meeting with Cheryl Miller, and say, oh, okay. Exactly. We know and that is, you know, this is, and we have to invest in our own personal branding. Because you're the one that's responsible for your leadership journey. You're responsible for your aspirations and ambitions. Nobody is going to come and sort of lift you and take you out from where you are. And too often, you know, we see that there was an excellent post the other day about my 10 years of success. Oh, my 10 years of overnight success, right? This is what it actually, and it's about hard, you know, hard work.
Absolutely.
And lots of setbacks and you know, that people don't often do, and lots of failure people don't think, because what they see is the end goal, and they're like, oh my God, I want that. If you want that, you have to put the graft.
Definitely. I mean, I feel as though we're going to need a part 2, Saj. We're going to need a part 2. Let's just finish off really quickly with just any tips that you would leave. You know, because we didn't talk about, for example, the fact that you know, that there is this element of you know, people sort of saying, well, why have we got women's programs? You know, is it fair? Is it fair to the men? You know, I've had in the last couple of years, I've had somebody say to me that they work for a particular firm, and I won't call the firm out, and that they've been told that because they're a white male, their chances of promotion are 0. Like now, and I don't know whether that is or isn't true. So there is something about you know, how those kinds of you know, sort of elements of backlash effectively are managed. But we're going to leave that for part 2. For when you come back on, we'll get
Absolutely.
into that a bit. What
No.
tips, you know, obviously, you know, I'd really encourage people to reach out to Saj if you want to know more about this. But just in terms of finishing this conversation, what tips would you leave for individuals and or organizations around you know, kind of like women's leadership? Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to just leave people
No,
with as a nugget?
it's actually, you know, the reality. And I just want to very
Yeah,
quickly say, when you are sitting at your table, I just want you to take a moment and look around that table.
yeah,
And the question that you need to be asking is it diverse, right? And does it actually reflect the communities that we serve or the customer base that we serve?
yeah,
And if the answer is no, then why is that so? Okay, and what can
yeah,
you be doing? And for me, you know, and this is hard hitting for some people to hear this, what I'm about to say. In 2050, yeah, which may seem a long time, but you and I both know as time is flying, it's going to happen like tomorrow. In 2050, women of color are going to be the biggest, the largest demographic of any organization, right? So we now need
wow,
to think about, if that is going to be the case, where are they? And like I said earlier on, if we were to slice any organization, we are right at the bottom of the pit, right? So we already know that if we're going to be the largest demographic, then we need to do something about, and that's why I have the Leadership in Color program. It's really about how can we come together, build those talent pipelines, and to actually start to progress women, because, you know, we're getting better at certain things like recruitment, but recruitment is not enough, because then what you need to do is think about what's the lived experience. It's not just about making numbers, because numbers to make up, right? So once somebody comes into your organization, what is their lived experience? And when you know, if you've got a young recruit, you know, coming through, when they look up, what do they see? If they're seeing there is no mirror of them, then where does the glass ceiling sit? And mostly it tends to be around middle management. And we need to shift that barrier or that glass ceiling and higher up. And you know, and for me, you know, I get that question, oh, well, why do you work with women? And I'm sort of saying, well, you know, either we can sit back and wait for things to get better, which is more systematic and it's much bigger than us, or we can actually pivot and strategically position ourselves get into those spaces. Because unless we get into those spaces and get those seats at those tables, nothing or very little will change. So for me, it's about, you know, it's the twofold leaders. You know, you really need to think about, what are you doing enough? Are you doing enough to pave that way? Are you doing enough to bring people up that do not mirror you? And with individuals, it's about, what are you going to do? You know, and I'm getting a little bit frustrated and tired when women say to me, oh, well, I can't see anybody that looks. And I said, well, neither could I. But then you sometimes you have to be the first. Sometimes you have to go to the wilderness. And, you know, so back and tell the story. So I know that takes courage, but it's not an easy playing field, you know, for anybody. But
absolutely,
these are I think, you know, we need to have more conversations, and we need to get, you know, people get used to having these conversations.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, as you were sort of wrapping up there, that thing you said about, there is something about mindset, because as you say, you know, and I feel almost as though I'm hearing this a lot more in terms of, well, there's no one that looks like me, or there's no role models, etc. But somebody has to be the first, right? Somebody has got to be the first. We can't just all be like hanging around for role models. There's a really great saying. It's from Maya Angelou, actually, but Oprah Winfrey says it a lot. And it's actually, somebody asks Oprah Winfrey a question about how she feels when she goes into you know, rooms and she's like the only person of color. And she says she often is the only female of color still now in a lot of the rooms she walks in. But she uses this Maya Angelou quote, which is, I come as one, I stand as 10,000. And it's thinking about all of the women, you know, of color, etc., that have come before you, and or people of color that have come before you, and kind of having that confidence in those spaces. And so there's so much of it is about mindset. You've got to have that. The mindset is key, you know, as well as changing the environments and making the organizations better. You've got to have the mindset to succeed. Sophia, thank you so much for joining us from the beginning to the end, because we've really gone way over today.
And Sophia, definitely, I think if Cheryl will have me back, there will definitely be part 2, part 3, part 4. This is a conversation that we need to keep alive and keep going on. So, thank you.
Absolutely. So everybody that's joined, honestly, thank you, Deirdre. And I think there was Yvonne as well. I think your name didn't come up, but I spotted it on my phone. Yvonne, thank you also for your comments, and also Stuart, and also obviously the amazing Deirdre. Deirdre, I feel like we're overdue a catch up. But I'm saying that all the time. I need to make more space in my diary for these catch-ups. But thank you all for joining. Saj, thank you so much for joining me and for getting up early for this.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's really set me for the day. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great weekend.